The political landscape in Washington was tense as usual, but this time, something was different. Nancy Pelosi, Speaker of the House, was feeling the weight of her responsibilities more than ever. Her grip on power had been shaky recently, as tensions within her party reached a boiling point. The Democrats were fractured, and with the next election looming, Pelosi knew that every move she made could make or break her legacy. On the other side of the aisle, former President Donald Trump was preparing for a comeback. His influence within the Republican Party was undeniable, and although he was no longer in office, his presence still loomed large. His speeches, his rallies, his tweets, everything he did stirred the pot. But this time, Trump was playing a different game. Trump had a plan, one that would catch Pelosi completely off guard. He had been watching her every move, studying her weaknesses, and waiting for the perfect moment to strike. And that moment was fast approaching. Pelosi was caught up in a whirlwind of negotiations, trying to juggle various factions within her party, when a message arrived from a trusted source. It was brief, almost cryptic: "Watch Trump. He's up to something." She scoffed at the message, dismissing it as paranoia. But in the pit of her stomach, a nagging feeling started to take root. Something was brewing, and it wasn't good for her. The clock was ticking. Trump had set the stage, and Pelosi had no idea that she was about to step into a trap so well laid that it would make her political career hang by a thread. It all began with a simple phone call, one that Pelosi never expected to receive. The voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm, as if it had rehearsed the words in advance. "Madam Speaker, we have an offer for you," the voice said. It was an aide, but not one Pelosi recognized. "There's a deal on the table. Trump is willing to work with you on bipartisan legislation. He says it could be a historic win for both sides. But there's a catch." Pelosi's brow furrowed. Trump and bipartisanship? That didn't sit right with her. It was too out of character. She'd seen him play this game before, always with an agenda hidden beneath the surface. But what was he really after this time? "Give me the details," she demanded, her mind racing. The aide explained that Trump wanted to propose a piece of legislation that would give sweeping powers to the executive branch to address economic recovery after the pandemic. In return, Pelosi and the Democrats would get a few policy wins on infrastructure and healthcare, but only if they agreed to back it immediately, without the usual negotiations. It sounded too good to be true. Pelosi, who was known for her shrewdness and experience, didn't trust it for a second. This was Trump's game, not hers. But the idea of a victory for her party, one that would boost her standing ahead of the upcoming elections, was tempting. She knew she couldn't let it pass without at least considering it. But what really made her pause was a strange request that came with the deal. Trump insisted that the final vote be held in a special session, a session where only a limited number of Congress members would be present. That was highly irregular. It was an odd stipulation, and Pelosi had no idea what he was trying to achieve by limiting the audience. It raised red flags, but the pressure was mounting. Time was running out. "I'll need to talk to my leadership team," Pelosi said curtly, ending the call. But in her gut, she could feel the weight of something more sinister, something Trump was about to spring on her. As she dialed her inner circle, Pelosi couldn't shake the feeling that she was being lured into something she couldn't yet see. But she had to play along. The stakes were too high. Pelosi's team met in her office that afternoon, the air thick with skepticism. She outlined the proposal, Trump's surprising offer for bipartisanship, and the caveat about the special session. Her advisors immediately raised concerns. "Madam Speaker, this is too risky," said one of her senior aides, Jonathan. "Trump doesn't do anything without an angle. This is a trap. He wants to push something through with minimal scrutiny. We can't let that happen." But Pelosi wasn't ready to dismiss it entirely. She had learned over the years to never underestimate Trump. He was a master manipulator, but he also knew how to get things done, whether through chaos or calculated strategy. "We can't be seen as obstructionists," she argued. If we walk away now, we lose the narrative. If we get this right, we can score a victory for the people, and it'll make us look good in the media. We just need to make sure we control the terms. For hours, they debated the pros and cons, and in the end, Pelosi decided to take a calculated risk. She'd play along with the special session, but she would ensure that her party had full control over the agenda. If Trump thought he could trap her, he was sorely mistaken. She'd turn the tables on him. The decision was made. Pelosi would meet with Trump's people the following day to finalize the details. But even as she made the call to her counterpart on the Republican side, a sinking feeling in her stomach grew. There was something about this deal that didn't add up, something she couldn't quite grasp. That night, Trump made a public statement about the proposed deal, calling it historic and a true example of American democracy working across party lines. His words echoed in Pelosi's mind, stirring a sense of unease. The next morning, Pelosi walked into the room where the deal would be negotiated, flanked by her top lieutenants. The room was sterile, the air heavy with tension. Across the table sat Trump's representatives, including one familiar face, Mike Pence, who had become a close ally of the former president since leaving office. Pence smiled as Pelosi took her seat, his demeanor calm, but his eyes betrayed a sharpness that told her he knew something she didn't. "We're all here to do what's best for the American people," Pence began, his voice smooth, almost rehearsed. "Let's not waste any time." Pelosi's eyes scanned the room, her mind working a mile a minute. She was prepared for a battle, but as Pence spoke, it became clear that this wasn't just about politics. It was about power. The deal that Trump had proposed was deceptively simple, but Pelosi knew the devil was in the details. She kept her cards close, nodding along and agreeing to vague terms, all while plotting her next move. She had to find a way to turn the trap around before it was too late. As the meeting went on, the feeling in the pit of her stomach deepened. Trump was setting her up. But this time, she wouldn't fall for it. The deal seemed too clean, too perfect on the surface, but Pelosi wasn't fooled. She had spent years watching Trump play his game, and this time, she was determined not to let him outsmart her. As the meeting wore on, the subtle hints of what Trump was truly after began to seep through the cracks. Pence had been careful, always speaking in careful, measured tones, never offering too much, never revealing too little. Every response he gave felt like it was designed to keep Pelosi in the dark, feeding her just enough information to make her think she was in control. But Pelosi wasn't the type to be placated with half-truths. She knew she had to push harder. As the conversation continued, she raised her concerns about the lack of transparency surrounding the bill's full details. "This is a major piece of legislation, and there are too many unknowns," Pelosi insisted, her voice cutting through the room. "We need to ensure that we have a full understanding of its impact before we proceed with any votes." Pence's smile remained unchanged, but Pelosi caught a brief flicker of annoyance in his eyes. "We're confident in the bill's framework. It's a win-win, Madam Speaker. You'll see." Trump's people remained calm, their expressions neutral. But Pelosi wasn't convinced. There was something they weren't telling her. She felt the hairs on the back of her neck rise, like an instinctual warning sign that something terrible was about to happen. Just as the meeting was wrapping up, an aide slipped a note into Pelosi's hand. She glanced down at it quickly. The message was brief, but it sent a shockwave through her. "They've already lined up the votes for the special session. It's a done deal. Be ready for the public announcement tomorrow." The realization hit her like a punch to the gut. Trump had already maneuvered to ensure the outcome, and he had done it without her knowledge. This wasn't just a trap, it was a setup. The special session wasn't for negotiation or compromise. It was a done deal, and Pelosi had been played into believing she had control. She stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I need a moment," she said, her voice cold. Outside the conference room, Pelosi marched down the hallway to her office, her thoughts racing. She had been outmaneuvered, outplayed by Trump. He had lured her in, made her think she could broker a deal, only to lock her into an outcome that would make her look weak in front of her own party. The trap had been laid with such precision that it was impossible to back out now without causing irreparable damage. Trump's people had already lined up the votes, the media was ready to praise the so-called bipartisan effort, and Pelosi's position was about to take a hit, hard. The public would see it as her failure to stop Trump, and no amount of explanation would change that perception. Her team gathered quickly around her as she stormed back into the office. They were looking for answers, but Pelosi didn't have any. The pieces were falling into place too quickly. "Madam Speaker, what's the next move?" Jonathan asked, sensing the gravity of the situation. Pelosi's face tightened. "There's no next move," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We've been blindsided. And now we have to figure out how to make sure it doesn't destroy us." She knew that she had to act fast, but the road ahead was unclear. Trump had set the stage perfectly, and it seemed almost impossible to untangle the mess without taking a massive political hit. But one thing was certain, Pelosi wouldn't go down without a fight. Trump had underestimated her, just as he had done with so many others. Now, she was going to make sure that he learned the hard way. Pelosi spent the next 24 hours locked in strategy sessions with her inner circle. The sense of urgency was palpable. Every time she closed her eyes, the realization that she had been outmaneuvered by Trump gnawed at her. But she refused to let the trap close around her neck. They had to act fast. The special session was set for the following day, and the media was already spinning the narrative. Trump's camp was touting it as a major win, with headlines praising his supposed willingness to work across party lines. Pelosi knew that if she let the vote go through without pushing back hard, it would be political suicide. "Madam Speaker, we need a counterstrike," Jonathan said, pacing back and forth. "We can't just sit here and let this happen." Pelosi leaned back in her chair, her mind working overtime. She had to disrupt the narrative and take back control, but how? One thought kept echoing in her mind. Trump's people had already lined up the votes, but they hadn't considered one key factor, Pelosi's power over her own party. The Democratic caucus was divided, but she still held sway over them. If she could rally enough members to oppose the bill, she could create enough chaos to throw the entire plan off course. She called a meeting with her top supporters, those who remained loyal to her despite the fractures within the party. Her voice was steady, but the fire in her eyes was unmistakable. "We have one shot at this. We're going to make sure that the votes don't line up in Trump's favor," Pelosi said. "We'll delay the session, force the Republicans into a corner. And we're going to expose this for what it is, an attempt to give Trump even more power while undercutting everything we've fought for." But her strategy came with risks. The media would paint her as obstructing progress, as sabotaging a potential victory. The American people were weary, tired of gridlock, and Pelosi knew she couldn't afford to look like she was playing petty politics. "You need to stay focused," she told her team. "This isn't about partisan games. This is about the future of the country. We can't let Trump walk away with this." With the plan in place, Pelosi moved quickly. She reached out to key moderates in her own party, convincing them that this deal was more about empowering Trump than about the American people. The clock was ticking, and the whispers of revolt began to spread like wildfire through the Democratic ranks. At the same time, she sent a message to Trump's camp, demanding changes to the special sessions agenda. She knew this would be seen as a challenge, but she was betting that Trump's ego would force him to play along. As the hours passed, Pelosi's move began to take shape. Trump's camp had underestimated her resolve. The session, once a done deal, was now facing growing opposition. But Trump wasn't the type to back down easily. He had his own tricks up his sleeve, and he wasn't going to let Pelosi derail his plan. That night, Trump made his own public statement, one that would send shockwaves through the political world. "We've always known that Washington works best when people from both sides of the aisle come together," he said, standing at a podium in front of an American flag. "But sadly, some in Congress would rather see America fail than see real progress. I'm not going to let that happen. The media ran with the headline, Trump denounces Pelosi's partisan games, will she derail bipartisanship? The trap had been set. Trump was positioning himself as the reasonable, unifying figure, while Pelosi was being painted as the obstructionist. The media narrative was slipping further out of her control. But Pelosi wasn't done yet. The next morning, the tension in the Capitol was unbearable. Pelosi sat in her office, watching the chaos unfold through the lens of a television screen. Trump's rhetoric was relentless, his campaign against her gaining steam. The media blasted her every move, portraying her as the villain in a high-stakes drama she never intended to star in. The Democrats were divided, with moderates questioning her leadership and progressives rallying behind her to stop Trump's power grab. She knew it was now or never. The special session was scheduled to begin at noon, but Pelosi had something up her sleeve. She wasn't just going to disrupt the vote, she was going to make it impossible for the bill to go through, no matter how hard Trump tried to push it. With her inner circle in tow, Pelosi began calling in favors, reaching out to key allies she had built over decades of political maneuvering. She called in the hardliners, the ones who had always supported her when the chips were down, and those with the nerve to stand against the overwhelming pressure. Get them in line, she said to Jonathan, her voice cutting through the tension. We're going to fight this on the floor, and we're going to fight dirty if we have to. Make sure everyone knows what's at stake. At noon, the special session began. The House floor buzzed with anticipation. The media was ready to cover the drama. Trump's camp was waiting for Pelosi to fall into line. But as soon as the session started, Pelosi dropped the bombshell. She walked to the podium with an air of quiet confidence, ignoring the whispers of discontent rising from the Republican side. Mr. Speaker, she began, her voice steady, we cannot, in good conscience, allow this bill to pass. It is a power grab dressed up as bipartisanship. We will not be manipulated, and we will not allow this to stand. The room fell silent as Pelosi's words echoed through the chamber. She had just made her move. She knew the vote was already in Trump's favor, but she was betting everything on one thing, that she could stir up enough dissent within her own party to turn the tide. Republican representatives, including Mike Pence, shot her cold glares from across the room. But Pelosi, resolute and unyielding, pressed on. We will be introducing a motion to delay the vote, she declared, her eyes scanning the room. We will not allow this to go forward until the full scope of its implications is made clear. Her motion was met with immediate resistance from Trump's camp, but Pelosi was relentless. She had already lined up enough Democratic votes to back her up. The floor erupted into chaos as the vote on the delay was called. The Republicans scrambled to maintain control, but it was clear, they were losing the momentum. The clock was ticking. As the debate dragged on, Pelosi's strategy unfolded perfectly. Her delay motion passed by a razor-thin margin. Trump's camp was blindsided. In the days that followed, the narrative began to shift. The media, once quick to declare Pelosi's political demise, now had to contend with her sudden resurgence. The public had been swayed by her fight for transparency, her refusal to bow to pressure. Trump, once seen as the master of the deal, was left scrambling to regain control of the situation. The House was thrown into further disarray as the negotiations dragged on, and the bill, once thought to be a done deal, was now on the brink of collapse. Pelosi had turned the trap around with a bold move, and this time, Trump had underestimated her. As the dust settled, Pelosi looked out of her office window, watching the political landscape shift in real time. She had played her cards right, outsmarting Trump in a way no one had expected. It wasn't over yet, but she had won this round. The fight, however, was far from finished. The days following Pelosi's unexpected victory were filled with a mixture of triumph and uncertainty. The bill had been delayed, but Trump's camp wasn't about to let it slip away quietly. They regrouped, recalibrated, and came up with a new strategy, one that would strike at the heart of Pelosi's weakness. In the days that followed, Trump's allies launched a full-scale media blitz. His supporters, now emboldened by the controversy, flooded the airwaves with accusations of Pelosi's incompetence, her failure to lead, and her relentless obstruction. The narrative shifted back to the idea that Pelosi was a roadblock to progress, an image that was beginning to stick. But Pelosi wasn't backing down. She had already anticipated the fallout. This was far from her first political battle, and she knew the longer this dragged on, the more desperate Trump would become. He would push for the bill again, and if she wasn't ready, he'd win. She had to finish this once and for all. The moment came when Trump's team called for a second vote on the bill, this time, no delays, no distractions. It was do or die. The media frenzy around the bill had reached a fever pitch. Everyone was watching. The entire nation was holding its breath. Pelosi stood before the press that morning, calm but resolute. She spoke clearly, addressing the nation as much as she did the media. This is not just about one piece of legislation. This is about the future of our democracy, she said, her voice unwavering. We will not let one man, or one party, dictate the direction of this country. We will not stand idly by as the checks and balances of our government are eroded for political gain. Her words sent shockwaves across the political world. It wasn't just about the bill anymore. It was a fight for the soul of the nation. She had positioned herself as the defender of democracy, the champion of checks and balances. The moment of truth arrived when the House session convened once again. Pelosi's team was ready. The full Democratic caucus had rallied behind her, united in their opposition to Trump's bill. Pelosi had orchestrated a maneuver that was nothing short of political genius. She had turned Trump's own base against him by exposing the bill as a dangerous consolidation of executive power, something that even many moderates found troubling. The vote was called. Trump's camp was confident, but Pelosi had done the impossible. She had pulled together a coalition strong enough to defeat the bill once and for all. The final tally came in. The bill failed. Trump's face, once filled with cocky confidence, hardened as the results were announced. His camp was blindsided. It was over. Pelosi stood at the front of the room, her expression calm but triumphant. She had won. Not just the battle, but the war. Trump's grand plan had been unraveled by the woman he had underestimated. The media swarmed as Pelosi's victory made headlines across the country. Pelosi outsmarts Trump, a historic defeat for the former president. Her party rallied behind her, proud of her leadership and strategy. She had outmaneuvered Trump at his own game, turning his own tactics against him. But Pelosi knew better than to rest on her laurels. The political fight would never end. There would always be another battle, another challenge. But for now, she had claimed victory, and in Washington, victories like this were hard to come by. As she left the chamber that day, a quiet smile tugged at her lips. She had proven, once again, that she was not just a political survivor, she was a force to be reckoned with. And for Trump? His trap had been set. But in the end, it was him who had been blindsided.